I was fascinated by this story as a Washington journalist for many years. I was fascinated by how DHS bungled how this came out. So her story is sort of the backbone of the book because it's a story of not just political lying, but how Washington works and doesn't work.
I want to go to the January 6th situation and the lies that radicalized people on January 6th and the story of Nina Jankowicz. Can you take us through that?
Sure. So the Nina story was really disturbing to me too. So Nina Jankowicz was a very dedicated expert in disinformation. She graduated from Bryn Mawr College. She wanted to dedicate herself to public service, and she took a job at the Department of Homeland Security running a new group that was supposed to be sort of an internal coordinating group that would help DHS agencies all coordinate their efforts on disinformation. It was given probably the worst name in the history of naming federal agencies. It was called the Disinformation Governance Board. And then DHS, which has never had a good public affairs or communications organization, they, instead of telling people what this thing was going to do and not do, they just leaked the news about it to Politico, which put out a 4-sentence or 3-sentence blurb about it in Politico Playbook. And so that was all people read about the Disinformation Governance Board, something that sounded like it came from George Orwell. So the DHS said nothing about it, and so the void was filled by Republicans who just made stuff up. And within hours, it just spiraled into lie after lie after lie that it was going to censor the internet and they were going to limit what you could say, and on and on and on. And it was the Ministry of Truth. So it was really scary what happened. Suddenly, Nina Jankowicz, dedicated public servant, is worrying about her safety. She goes to bed the first night, puts chairs under the doorknobs of her house because she's worried somebody's going to break in. And she starts getting death threats because people in conservative media are saying terrible things about her, making things up all the time, making things up about the Ministry of Truth. And so now there are multiple villains in this. And one of the bad guys is DHS for not explaining what this thing was going to do and not do. So I was fascinated by this story as a Washington journalist for many years. I was fascinated by how DHS bungled how this came out. So her story is sort of the backbone of the book because it's a story of not just political lying, but how Washington works and doesn't work.
So it's interesting, it's coincidental. About a week before that fiasco and her ultimate resignation, which was Scaramucci-like, by the way, I think it only lasted about a half of a Scaramucci. She was on my podcast, and we were interviewing her related to her book on "quote unquote" how to win the information war. And the reason I brought it up is that a lot of elements of what was going on in her book are in your book. That we now have people that have just decided that their path to power is going to be through lying. And they also know that because we've segmented the media, this is really my question, is the segmentation that's taken place, Bill, in the media further this? So meaning you said something, Fox said the minute they stopped the lying, they lost viewers. Does the segmentation in the media reinforce certain lies on both sides?
Oh, absolutely. And it's here's what I do with my students. So I teach at Duke undergrads, and I teach couple different courses, news writing. I also teach a course that's called News as Moral Battleground. And the way I recommend my students consume media is I tell them to think of it like the food pyramid. So the base of the food pyramid is news, consume news. The middle is analysis, like consume analysis. And then a little bit of opinion. But don't make opinion journalism the bulk of your diet. And then at the top, always try to consume at least one serving every day of an opinion you disagree with. So listen to a podcast that from someone you disagree with, or read a column you disagree with, but try every day to consider something that you disagree with. But that I call it Bill's media consumption pyramid. That the whole idea of that is to get back to this healthy diet. What's happening instead? People are just consuming opinion journalism from their side. And I don't think that's healthy. And so, but that reflects what you're alluding to, Anthony, which is this fragmentation of the media. And that just, that sort of puts us into our own tribes, and it makes it harder for us to understand the other side. It makes it harder for us to have a conversation. And so I think that's why I tell my students, consume something every day that you disagree with.